There it goes. This is how Islam expanded. That's Islamic music for you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Even better than that. I'll have to check and see if I cashed one already or not. We'll just go and sign them all and then I'll make sure. Okay. Give me church.com. That's
Did
it.
that because and nothing happened that got me there.
Okay.
It just took me to email. I put even church got there.
Do it this way. Sometimes by putting the www on there, it makes a difference. There it is.
Now from here, you go to get how do I load the app in her phone?
For Zoom?
Yes,
Okay. Um,
that's just the website. You got it upside down.
try this again. Okay, that's it there.
Is it in her phone?
No, if you send her this, she'll get Zoom and
I
everything.
have to look it on her phone for good.
Okay, then when with the Zoom,
That's only for today.
when she gets it, it'll ask her to download Zoom. If she doesn't have it.
Have it?
Oh, is this her phone?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Um, I'll undo her sound. Allow. Allow. Okay. And
Okay,
now
yeah,
undo
I
her.
have to do this thing down here, disconnect.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Okay, well, you got a little bit of treat of how Islam expanded. Diana, you don't have to copy the link. I sent that also to you. Okay. Um, I will I will make a note that for the update, let me make a note over here in my book. Okay. Send is link on the update this Thursday. What I'll do is I will send this link. Turn your sound off because it's very annoying. Okay, and you can watch and see how the various ways that Islam expanded over the years. And there's up to 1366. Okay, so you get a look at that. And let me see what else I can think of. Okay, so you see a bunch of names and parts of movements, events that happened. Um, if you were to do a data interpretation of this, if you said, "What's this picture showing?" What what one should interpret this as is the evolution of power in the Catholic Church, the evolution of power, how they went. Well, I guess you can't see it that way. I'm looking at the list and you're seeing the website there. There it is. There's the list. The evolution of power of the Catholic Church. Um, that's the key thing for this Thyatira age, how it rose in power, how it increased from having a bishop of Rome and the Pontifex Maximus, who moves on to claiming spiritual power over the church, to primacy of the Pope amongst patriarchs, how he was the first amongst patriarchs, which was sort of like a confederacy. Then he moves on to supremacy over the church. Supremacy is different than primacy, and that primacy is shared power. Supremacy is power over the whole Christian church, the whole Christian enterprise. And because of the church's connection to the Roman government at the beginning of this period, because of that, it grows in mixing itself with the secular power. It's going to end, this age is going to end with the Pope claiming power over the government, not just working hand in hand with the government, but working over the government. And that mixture of power, as they say, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's going to be it's going to provide the denouement of the Catholic Church, which is a nice word. How many people like denouement? Joe might know about denouement. Okay, it's the after the climax of a story, you have the downfall, and that's well, it's the anticlimax, but it's the denouement. Okay, so you learn a new word today. I won't use it again. Okay, so you find the downfall of the Catholic Church, which is going to lead into the Reformation. You will note, and I will refer to it again in a little bit, that on page 161 in the book, if you want to look ahead, that you'll see a lot of the pre-Reformation figures, and how there were always those who were working against that power structure, and that is another key factor of this age. So it's the church and the Pope rise in power, get absolute enough power, claim absolute power. They Power corrupts it. They misuse that power in a secular kind of way. They're going to use the let me get the word out that I want. They're going to use the Inquisition. They're going to use the Crusades. They're going to try to exercise that absolute power that way. It's not going to play in their favor. What they're going to do is end up weakening the church in the East. The East falls, and then the Renaissance and Reformation are invited in into the culture, into the situation because of that. And that's where we're going to get that's going to mark the end of the age this age, is the Reformation. Okay, so again, growing in power, corrupted in power, weakening of the church, invitation of the Reformation. And that's a good bottom line for it all. Okay, we are on page 149. We've got information here about the Crusades. It's kind of like background information, and it will give you. I mean, it's not worth going into the Crusades so much, except to know that when the church gets the sword and they can command armies, you know that's got to be problems. The purpose of the government, the secular government, is to use the sword. Okay, Romans chapter 15. Romans 13, thank you. Romans chapter 13 is to use the sword in its administration in God's kingdom. The church's role is to try to make peace, to save people from the sword. Brother Joe, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the Roman Catholic Church has tried to bury some of its history in the Inquisition by saying they didn't have anything to do with it. Well, they didn't do the executing, it was the secular government that did, but it was at their
But
behest that they would
yes,
do things like that. Because, we had the state church government model where
yeah,
the church was very much active in what was going on in state affairs. But when it came time to the actual whatever punishment there was involved, that's when they said, "Oh well, that's your job." This
yeah.
way,
Uh,
and
and that's a good qualification to make, because it was really at the end of this age is when they claimed the power over the state, the spiritual power over the state. Okay, so what's good to notice is down at the bottom of the page where it says Fourth Crusade. That's the one that is most interesting to us, because this is what is going to be the event that kicks off uh, the um, the downfall of the East and the introduction of the Renaissance. Okay, so and let me describe that just a moment. The downfall of the East, it sends over scholars from the East to the West as they're fleeing Islam. And when they do, they're going to bring with them the Greek scriptures. There's going to be revival of classical learning. People are going to start looking at the Greek scriptures. They're going to look at the Latin Vulgate and say, oops, something's not right here. And this is where the Reformation thinkers are going to come. Now, and by the way, this is with the um, with the influence of the pre-Reformation thinkers. There was always this get back to the Bible mentality, and it's going to find full fruition in the Reformation. So it says here the Fourth Crusade from 1202 to 1204 AD. The Fourth Crusade took an unexpected turn when the Crusaders diverted their efforts towards Constantinople, okay, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Now, remember the Byzantine Empire, that's the Eastern Roman Empire. That's the part that's not under control of the through the Roman Pope. So the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Empire, the city was captured and looted in 1204 AD, leading to the establishment of a Latin Empire in Constantinople. This diversion from the original goal of retaking Jerusalem led to widespread criticism and condemnation. So the effect of the Fourth Crusade is over on page 150, where it says the effect of the Fourth Crusade, and I recommend reading through that because it's a little bit wordy. Okay, what you should know is that the crusade, it's on its way to Jerusalem. They were charged too much money for the transportation. So, and I'm giving you the summary of things. They're charged too much money. They say, well, we've got this bishop over in Constantinople. He can help us out. They don't end up getting the money from him. So they look at the city, they loot the city. When they loot the city, this puts, and by the way, because the Fourth Crusade is headed up by the Pope in Rome. Okay, the bishop in Constantinople, he says, "Oh man, you guys in the West are a mess. You try to get money out of us. You looted us. This is going to make bad blood between the East and the West." Now, there's going to be efforts at trying to work things out. It's not going to go well because they've got this attitude that is now developed in the East. It's going to take another couple of hundred years, but over that couple of hundred years, as you had infighting in the East, without the support of Christianity in general, I say Christianity loosely at that time because you didn't have the support of the West so much. That is going to weaken the Eastern Empire. Islam is going to attack it. They're going to fall. So, paragraph number 402 talks about the fragmentation of the Byzantine territories, contributing to that downfall. Okay, so yeah, the Byzantine Empire did not trust in its potential allies from that time. Okay, so let's go down to page, and you can read all about that in depth, all the ins and outs of that on pages 149 to 151. Which brings us down to at about the same time period, the Fourth Lateran Council. Okay, you'll notice here, see that little tink right there? That's where the Lateran Council takes place. You're going to have this on your picture that is sent to you there, by the way. Okay, so you'll see that it's right here about the time of the Fourth Crusade. So you've got the Fourth Crusade going on. Things are going to get messed up in the East, but over in the West, you've got this council where they're going to take a firm stand on the sacraments. It's here that you're finally going to see the sacrament of the Mass, the transubstantiation, is going to be established as doctrine. You didn't really have it before then. Now, one of the things that has happened in Romanism is that they will say, well, we have this doctrine that we're establishing now, like 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 years later, but we always taught this. It's always there in our antiquity. Well, yeah, it got introduced maybe as a pagan idea in antiquity, and then sort of was, going in and out and getting a grip on things, and so they called that tradition. Okay, tradition means you introduce an error, and if you hold the error long enough, it becomes doctrine. So that's pretty much how it works. So they might say that it came by tradition, but no, it was not traditionally taught. What happened was it became firmed up at this time in the Lateran Council. So you want to make note also in that paragraph. It talks about page 161 again. A reference to that is that the Lateran Council was a response also to the dissenters that you had rising up. Now the pre-Reformation dissenters are going to be rising up, and we'll get to that in a couple of weeks. Okay, so this paragraph is worth reading here from Newman. There were in attendance 71 primates and archbishops, 412 bishops, and 800 priors and abbots. East and West participated. Most of the Oriental patriarchates were represented. The organization of a new crusade was the most prominent topic of the discussion. It was enacted that the peace of God be kept among Christian princes for 5 years to achieve this end. The union with the Greek church was also considered. They were thinking about joining the two churches together. And here's the important point, the doctrine of transubstantiation was now for the first time defined. The word itself seems to have been now first used. Ample provision was made for the persecution of heretics. Those are the dissenters on page 161. And toleration of heresy was made a ground for punishment and even death. We say this for the umpteenth time at this point, that the Catholic Church distinctly evolved over time. what people think as the mainline church, as the main church, and this is the main one, I think that's got to be even challenged now at this time. Uh, but uh, but this is not true. In fact, something that different Catholics are um, they discover to their surprise is that Catholic churches across the world are not the same all across the board. I think of one of Nancy's aunts when she talked to her about the doctrine of transubstantiation, said, "Oh no, we were never taught that." And we're going back 50 years ago before you had, great ecumenical strides. Well, you were getting ecumenical strides 50 years ago. And I think, Nancy, did you ask a priest about that when we went over to visit? Yeah, and he was you tell it there because you do it best.
Yeah, I asked a priest who was having a very spirited discussion with me. And I said, well, my aunt claims she was never taught that. And she's a devout Catholic. He said, your aunt is misguided. Either that or she wasn't paying attention in religion class.
Yeah.
That's because he was very firm about that.
Yeah. Now we knew that before he said it, but so this was a big affirmation on his part, and it's a big affirmation because he was like, no, she is misguided. Yeah, this is a teaching of the church. So some every once in a while you might find somebody from a Catholic church from somewhere else in the world, and they're like, oh yeah, no, this is very different than the way we do it back home. And that will account for that. However, something I would like to remind them is, hey, you've got a pope and he speaks ex cathedra, then you've got to go by what he's saying. Yeah, Brother Joe.
I think, in fairness, uh, you ask the average Roman Catholic, they don't know what transubstantiation is, even if their church really kind of teaches it, because I think most people think when they go to communion similar to us. I mean, in the sense that all they're taking is something that reminds them of it. But if you tell people, no, this is the, your church teaches that this is the both. No, a lot of times, say, well, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
I'm just like, well, you can't be in the Catholic Church because that's like the centerpiece of the mass. I mean, it's just that's the capstone, and it's just like if you don't believe that, then you really aren't a Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, more devout Catholics might think this, but the bulk of the Catholic people, just like any other church, okay, they're not familiar with their own doctrine or what they're being taught. So we don't want to say it's only because they're Catholics they have this mentality. This is a human mentality that they might miss things. So here are on page 152 the seven sacraments. Okay, baptism, the necessity of baptism for salvation. Okay, so they think that baptism is necessary for salvation. Now, I think I've heard that somebody unbaptized might be able to be granted baptism because they say they have a baptism of fire, and so had some kind of baptism. Even I mean, it's one of the ways to excuse that the person wasn't baptized. It declared that baptism is essential for all individuals to be cleansed from original sin and to receive the grace necessary for salvation, ensuring their incorporation into the church. And in Protestantism today, those who do infant baptism, they have something similar. They could have it identical or at least similar. Two, transubstantiation, the doctrine of transubstantiation, which refers to the change of the substance of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ during the Eucharist, was officially defined and affirmed. So remember, that was the first time was in this council. Penance. The council affirmed the necessity of confession and penance for the forgiveness of sins, emphasized the role of the priest as the minister of reconciliation in the sacrament of penance, also known as confession or reconciliation. Marriage. The council addressed matters related to the sacrament of matrimony, including issues of consent, impediments to marriage, and the validity of marriages, clarified the church's authority over marriage, and set standards for the solemnization of marriages, anointing of the sick or last rites. While not extensively discussed, the council reaffirmed the practice of the anointing of the sick as a sacrament for the spiritual comfort and healing of the seriously ill. Confirmation and 7 holy orders. They affirm the importance of the sacraments of confirmation and holy orders in the spiritual life of the church. Now, what's interesting is nobody can get all 7. Okay, because if you're in holy orders, you can't get married, and if you're married, you can't get holy orders. So it's I guess it's a guarantee that nobody has assurance of heaven. Okay, because they can't get all 7 of them at any one time. Okay, so you not only see the growth of power of the Catholic Church, you also see a refining of the doctrines of the Catholic Church. Okay, this brings us down to the Inquisition. Okay, so now that you have these documents or doctrines, now that you've got the Crusades going on, we're going to add on the punishment of the sinners in the Inquisition. Paragraph number 404. The medieval Inquisition refers to a series of efforts by the Catholic Church to combat heresy, especially during the 12th to the 14th centuries. Its activities were not centralized and they varied across different regions of Europe. The roots of the medieval Inquisition trace back to the 11th and 12th centuries, when various movements, such as the Cathars, also known as the Albigensians, we're going to look at those. This is one of the groups. And the Waldensians, we're going to also look at those later on. These are some of the pre-Reformation dissenters. They gained popularity in southern France and other parts of Europe. These movements challenged the established doctrines and practices of the Catholic Church, which prompted the Church to take measures to suppress them. Okay, so there was a papal bull, which I'm sure there's some jokes that could be made about that, which condemned heretical movements, provided guidelines for their suppression, and they were enforced later on. Okay, Dominican and Franciscan friars often played key roles. The Inquisition aimed to identify and eliminate heresy through various means, including questioning, interrogation, and the use of informants, often relying on authorities to carry out investigations and punishments. In 1252 AD, they authorized the use of torture. Now, the Inquisition means a couple of special things along the way, because the Inquisition was recognized by the Jews as a means of carrying out anti-Semitism, and they look at it as a persecution of Jews. We always look at it as a persecution of dissenting Christians and people who didn't want to go along with the Catholic flow. Let me see. It started to decline by the 14th century. And it's going to lead into the Western Schism and the rise of humanity. We're going to look at the Western Schism next. Let's see. Make sure I know what I'm talking about here exactly. Okay. Okay, so we're going on to page 153 then. The Babylonian captivity of the papacy and the Western Schism. Okay, so that's going to go on from 1378 to 1376. And you can see this is during the time of the Reformation. It's after the Crusades. The big idea that you see on the page there, the papacy was generally falling into disdain. This is where things are going to start turning downward now. From the establishment of papal power, this is paragraph 410, from the establishment of papal power over the investiture controversy, remember that's when the popes said, no, we get to name who's king. We get to name who are the officials of the church instead of a king doing it. We get to do it. So when you had that controversy, um, the Pope's exercise of power was characterized by what commonly happens to those who give in to the temptation of power, which is power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The larger the administration, the less man is able to exercise control over it. Now, I find that to be just an interesting factor in everything because what you've got is anytime a government becomes very large, it becomes inefficient. We can't handle that kind of control. The greatest example of that is Russian communism. They got themselves all the power. They invested all the power in the government, did away with the religion, condemned religion because it got in the way of communism. And the command economy that they created was just too big for them to handle. Nobody was smart enough. Nobody can be smart enough. No committee can be smart enough where they can just manipulate the whole economy to make everything work quickly. What you ended up with was in communism, and this is true of all communist states, is you get too much of one thing and not enough of another. So when we look at the government here in the United States, whenever you have those forces that want to regulate everything, and they want to have all the laws, and they want to determine, which stove you get to use and which car you get to drive, and when they start putting all the power in the federal government, that's a bad thing. Because there's always the law of unintended consequences. What ends up happening is those who get in power, they say, well, we want to have price gauging. I mean, we want to have price gouging, and we want to end price gouging. And so that little thing sent shockwaves throughout the economic community because some of those of us who are old enough, we remember the price controls that they tried to put on gasoline. I remember having a gasoline line. You could only go on uh, even or odd days, depending on your license plate number. You could only get so much for your car. And I remember trying to get home from the Coast Guard Academy, and my parents going several times to go get cans of gasoline to give my ride a full tank so he could continue on. Uh, and that was all because of price controls. It's the unintended consequences that take place. So it turns out that the free market really is the answer for everything because you have natural price controls as people say, this is what I really need and this is what I can really do without. Now, the reason you mention free market is not because we're talking about a capitalist system. What we're talking about is a mentality that says individuals have responsibility for their own lives. That is the stand that we take before God, that you don't have a state structure that tries to control everybody. Neither do you have a religious structure, hierarchical structure to try to control everybody's spiritual lives. What is famous amongst Baptists, and this is good Baptists and bad Baptists alike, is the priesthood of the believer, where each person is responsible for themselves. That is comparable to the whole sense of the free market economy. If you have a church that goes sour, you leave it, you go to another church, but we're not sour, so stay here, don't go anywhere, please. Okay, so, but this is what happens with free market principles applied to spiritual life. Each individual has responsibilities. Uh, so, so the absolute power that the Catholic Church was having, they are not, nobody could be possibly smart. It's not possible for anybody to be smart enough to be able to have that kind of control on everybody. Let everybody stand before God and preach repentance, and you stand a chance. Now, I say nobody is possible to do that. Actually, I am distinctly wrong in one respect. There is one leader, and his name does not begin with a T, uh, who's able to manage an economy of that would govern the whole world by himself. His name begins with a J instead. In the millennium, Jesus will be able to do it. There will be a world governance by Jesus, and he is smart enough because he's God. He can lay down the law for everybody and deal with it that way. Before that time, it's not going to happen in our time. When the Antichrist comes into power, he's going to try it. He's going to try to have a world system. It won't work. Okay, it's going to have its own failures, especially because it's going to have a bunch of judgments by God on it. And then Christ comes back in the second coming, and he destroys the Antichrist and sets things up for the next 1,000 years. Okay, so power corrupts. Paragraph. Let me see. Okay. Okay. And it says here, at the height of the Pope's power, their bad performance, I should say, led to the weakness that would crack open the door to allow a flood of change by the Renaissance, followed by the Reformation. Paragraph 411, the Crusades had profound effects on people's attitudes, contributing to a strong aversion to upholding papal absolutism. So the human governments that are fractured all over the world, the Western Empire there, the Crusades are going to be a problem to them. The Inquisition is going to be considered to be a problem. It's going to bring the dissent into the limelight. Paragraph 413, the expansion of the church administrative apparatus and the infusion of opulent living within the Roman Curia necessitated vast resources. They had to get the resources somehow, because what you've got is a bunch of corrupt officials who are at the head of the church. Now, with that corrupt lifestyle, they need money. They're going to start to do things. If you look at the bottom of page 153, the one that seems to be one of the biggest ones is indulgences and dispensations. Now, there are a couple of things before that, annates and reservations. You can read about those. Those are ways of getting money out of people. But the indulgences and dispensations prove to be the real downfall. This is what Luther's going to be aware of. That's what he's going to try to argue against in his 95 Theses, is this use of indulgences. Now, had a thought there. I got to remember it. Right to tax. Okay, yeah, let's just, oh, yeah. This reminds me that one of the things that Luther saw when he was on his spiritual journey, he thought, oh, I'm going to get to go visit Rome. And when I get there, I'll have all my questions answered. They'll certainly do it right. He goes to Rome, and it is such a den of iniquity that it just boggles the imagination. And so when Luther sees this, and then he goes home and he's got these people raising money by indulgences at the expense of the people with bad doctrine, they're doing it. This just sets them off completely. And that's where probably that 95 Theses is the beginning of the Reformation, the first notable event, the catalyst for the Reformation. Okay, so looking down at the bottom page 153, the beginning of that bold print, talks about indulgences. They were a form of remission of temporal punishment for sins, often in exchange for acts of piety, penance, or charity. By making a financial donation to the church or performing specific religious deeds, individuals could obtain an indulgence and reduce their time in purgatory. During the 13th century, indulgences were sometimes sold to raise funds for various church projects, including the construction of cathedrals or the support for the Crusades. And then they had dispensations. They were a violation of restrictions that were readily granted for money. Became a leading aim with the popes to enrich their relations, especially their illegitimate children. Hence, nepotism was practiced in such a way as to scandalize Christendom. So you had popes and bishops. They had, children out of wedlock because they weren't allowed to get married, and this whole system was being supported by that. I don't know if I have it somewhere, but there's a thing about every when getting indulgence, every time the bell rings, another soul out of purgatory springs. And I can't remember exactly how the quote goes, but I'm told that in German, it sounds very much like the English translation. And it got to be so bad that when one of the prime indulgence salesmen, um, Brother Joe, can you think of Ted? No. Yes. Uh, could you Google Tet Wetzel and see? Wetzel sounds exactly right, but I think the name Tet was in there. Anyhow, when he was out there selling indulgences, he gets robbed by some highwaymen. They get brought up on charges and they get let go because they had an indulgence for the matter. They were already forgiven, but it was entirely corrupt. Um, so even devout, page 154, paragraph 414, even devout Catholics began to assert that within the Roman Curia, everything could be had for money. And then you had the imposition of celibacy on clergy and the expansion of monastic orders. They did not have ethical guidelines, and they resulted in a surge of immoral behavior. The papacy progressively turned into an object of ambition, causing the papal administration to weaken and be disdained. This is going to set up for the German emperors who could have tried to have some influence on that, and it's going to further put into disdain the Catholic Church. The Catholic papacy is going to be switched over to France, but we'll get to that in a moment. Brother Joe, yeah. Johann Tetzel. Okay, so it wasn't Wetzel. Wetzel is the pretzel that you can get. Is Wetzel's pretzels. There you go. That's where the Wetzel comes from. So we got a T in there and a W and an Etzel at the same time. Miss Nancy.
We're looking back in history and thinking of ancient times where we're seeing anything can be had for money and people can pay for their sins with money. But I don't really see how that's any different than buying masses for the dead.
Yeah.
Or we have a relative who had been married in the Catholic Church with a high mass and all the trimmings, and that didn't work out. And the Catholic Church is supposed to be very much against divorce.
Yeah.
But she wanted a divorce.
For a fee.
She got it, and for a fee had another Catholic approved wedding with all the trimmings and the white dress and everything as if she had never been married before. And it just seems to me that the same sort of idea exists where, well, if you're willing to pay the price, we will give you whatever you need. So maybe they're not confiscating farms anymore and people's homes and their cattle, but it's really the same idea. For a price, you can have whatever you need.
Yes, exactly. I'm just looking up here also. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I wanted to check this because I thought this for sure. Are indulgences and dispensations granted today? The answer is yes. Indulgences and dispensations are still granted today, particularly in the Catholic Church. Okay. So yeah, they never did end, and what you're saying would be, I would say, would have to be. There's got to be a connection between the two, if it's not one and the same thing. Yeah.
In recent times, I had somebody connect with me on Facebook, and I thought, oh, this is great because now I can have some sort of spiritual input to this person who we all had friends in common, and they had been trying to witness to her. Well, as it turns out, what she wanted ultimately from me was a record of her husband's baptism many, many years ago in this church, because somehow, and I really don't know how, um, they were going to get married, even though he'd been married before. And I'm not sure, I think she'd also been married before. And they were going to somehow clean all that up, even though he was baptized in a Baptist church. They were going to recognize this and have some kind of a ceremony. And to my knowledge, I don't think he has any intention of being Catholic. But for a price, they had the whole thing okayed, and they're bringing up all of their blended families Catholic.
Yeah.
I don't really get how that works, because
By money.
but I mean, how they justify it, like, to anybody's face, because growing up, it was like, you don't marry a non-Catholic, and that's all there was to it. And I remember my father, wonderful father that he took a very dim view of the Catholic Church, and he was only confirmed to marry my mother. Like, he didn't really want anything to do with it, but he bit the bullet and went along with it, and they required that of him. These days, it doesn't really sound like they're requiring much of anything, so long as you come up with the money.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how, like, on the face of it, if they explain this to somebody else, I don't know how they justify that.
Amen. Yeah, Brother Joe.
Yeah, similarly, I remember an experience I had at work. A colleague was converting from, I think, disciples of Christ to Catholicism, and I tried to say that, Catholicism. I mean, I know what his church taught wasn't biblical either, but I was trying to mention that, Catholicism isn't really Christianity. He says, well, yes, it is. And I thought, well, then why do you have to convert?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, if you look on page 154, look at the big idea. The big idea I mentioned part of this. German emperors over the Holy Roman Empire generally neglected any oversight they could have exercised. So the Pope moved to claim universal spiritual and temporal power. Okay, so Boniface VIII, he prepares Unum Sanctum in 1302. He claimed absolute power over all mankind and temporal power of government. Yeah. Notice in the delineation, you can read over that, but notice in the bold print, it says, in its power are two swords, namely the spiritual and the temporal. Both are in the power of the church. The former is of the priest, the latter is by the hand of kings and soldiers, but at the will and sufferance of the priest. That spiritual power surpasses in dignity and in nobility any temporal power whatever. Down a little bit further. If the terrestrial power err, it will be judged by the spiritual power, but if the highest power of all err, it can be judged only by God and not by man. So you have, definitely he's claiming power over um, over the temporal power, over the government. Okay. So this is going to lead to what is called the Babylonian captivity of the church. Now, I'm closing with that, but just looking ahead, what's going to happen is the Pope is going to move to France, and that's called the Babylonian captivity and especially because it lasts about 70 years, and so it looks like the Babylonian captivity of Israel. And you're going to have competing popes, 2 or 3 or more popes. They're going to be claiming power. They're going to be anathematizing each other and excommunicating each other, and it's going to look really bad. So that's what's going to come up for the next time. Let's get a microphone over to Miss Maria there. Julie, could you yes. And then you just have to Push the button until the light goes on.
Good afternoon.
There you go.
Oh, praise the Lord. Okay. I did read about the Borgias at the time, the Borgias,
The Borgias.
and they
Okay.
used to do the flagellation.
Self-flagellation. Yeah, a
And
bunch of
they
people
will
did that.
charge the sinner and tell them 30 flagellations and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Makes no sense. I also read that within the Inquisition, not only the anti-Zionists, but anyone that will actually marry them or convert to Judaism at the time.
Yeah.
And it was horrific. I did
Yeah.
a study on the Inquisition, number 6, the latest one, because
Okay.
there were about 6 of them,
Mm.
different times, by Queen Isabel,
Yeah.
the one that actually funded for Christopher Columbus
Yeah.
to come to the islands. And even women,
Yeah.
were tortured to death. So
Yes.
it's ridiculous
Yeah.
to share that.
Yeah. Thank you. Somebody else, anything else? Okay. So if you had to walk away with anything, it is that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And now you can see specific ways in which they did it, the Inquisition, the indulgences, the Crusades. It's all a mess. They can't handle it. Here comes the fruit. Oh, and when we add on the dissenters, we'll see that the times were ripe for the Reformation. It took 1,000 years for this to happen. Yes, Miss Nancy. Yes, yes. The headline for that is on the previous page. I should have put a carriage return into there. The Babylonian captivity of the church we're going to look at next. And especially we want to get into the dissenters. That'll be especially interesting. Okay.